We live in times when silence has become a luxury. The mind races constantly, too busy, too restless, too distracted. And amidst this relentless noise, we forget what it means to live with presence, to hear our own thoughts without fear, to feel the now without trying to escape it. This small book is not a manual. It is an invitation, a calm yet firm call for you to return to yourself, to reconcile with your mind, your body, the present moment. Here, Stoic philosophy is not studied, it is lived. It presents itself as a silent compass in the chaos, an inner refuge when everything outside is crumbling. Each topic in this ebook is a doorway, a possibility for pause, a space to breathe. There are no promises of easy answers because true wisdom does not offer formulas. It reveals paths, and the path you will tread from here is inward. Welcome to silence, to reconnection, to clarity. Because when the mind quiets, the soul, at last, begins to speak. The noise no one hears, the invisible war. Within the mind. There is a kind of noise that doesn't come from horns, phones, or crowds. It's the sound of disordered thoughts, incessant worries, and memories that insist on returning when all we want is peace. This silent noise lives within us. It wakes us in the middle of the night. It steals our attention during the day. It prevents us from simply being. The Stoics knew this. For them, the true battlefield was never outside, but within. Because it is there, on the secret stage of consciousness, that life truly happens. People look at you and think everything is fine. But only you know how much your mind screams in silence, how exhausted you feel without physical effort, how hard it is to stay lucid amidst a constant bombardment of thoughts. What if it doesn't work out? What if they judge me? What if I'm not enough? And if, and if, and if. Stoicism emerges here, like a lighthouse in a storm. Not as a cold doctrine, but as a silent refuge. Seneca wrote that it's not the weight of the day that destroys us, but the mental clutter with which we choose to carry it. Often, we live more in what we fear might happen than in what is actually happening. Mental noise creates monsters that don't exist. It disconnects us from the only thing that's real, the now. That's why the Stoics taught us to anchor ourselves in the present moment, and that begins with silence. Not an external silence, but one that arises when we stop reacting to everything that invades us. This noise is fueled by resistance. Resistance to what was, to what is, to what might be. And the Stoic secret to silencing this inner war lies precisely in the calm acceptance of the inevitable. It's not resignation, but clarity. It's not passivity, but wisdom. When we understand that we don't control the world, but we can govern how we interpret it, something within us quiets. It's the beginning of liberation. Silencing to hear. What the mind quiets, the heart speaks. When the mind is too full, the heart has no space to whisper. And it's curious how we spend our lives seeking answers outside, chasing gurus, formulas, promises, while the only true compass already pulses within us, silently. But it can only be heard when the mental noise ceases. That's why the Stoic learned to be silent before speaking. They learned to listen to what isn't said with words, because that's where the deepest truth resides. Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself in his Meditations, not for the world. His texts weren't speeches, they were silent conversations with his own soul. He knew that wisdom isn't about shouting certainties, but cultivating enough inner silence to discern what truly matters. Silencing the mind is like cleaning a mirror. You don't change what's reflected, you just see it clearly. It's at this point that clarity is born, not from answers, but from presence. And it's in this silence that the heart begins to speak. It doesn't shout, it doesn't insist, it merely points gently. How many times have you known the answer, but the noise of fears stopped you from trusting it? How many wrong decisions came from haste, anxiety, a chattering mind that doesn't know how to wait? The Stoics understood that discernment doesn't impose itself, It reveals itself in silence, and only those who learn to listen within can walk firmly without. The modern world teaches us to react to everything, to take a stand constantly, to have an opinion on everything. But there's a far rarer strength, the ability to not react, to observe without judging, to wait without despairing. This is Stoic virtue. This is true presence. And in this state, where the mind is calm, not from a lack of thought, but from a lack of agitation, the heart can finally take the helm. The heart, unlike the mind, doesn't calculate. It feels. And don't be fooled. This doesn't make it less wise. On the contrary, many of the most important decisions in your life didn't come from spreadsheets, but from subtle intuitions. And it's in silence that this intuition becomes audible. The Stoic knew this and therefore cultivated the habit of solitude, contemplation, silent questioning. Not as an escape, but as a dive inward. When we quiet the turmoil, we finally hear that serene voice that was always there. The voice that says, "You already know." But this requires courage. Courage to stay with yourself, to not flee into distractions, to face your own thoughts as if cleaning a dark room, a drawer full of accumulated things. And in doing so, an almost sacred clarity begins to emerge, like a sunrise after a long night. This silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. In it, you begin to feel with greater precision what's misaligned in your life. Relationships that no longer make sense. Paths you keep following out of fear of change. Repressed emotions begging to be felt, not stifled. All of this reveals itself in the space where confusion once reigned. Silence, then, becomes a mirror that reflects what needs to be seen. And seeing clearly is the first step to changing wisely. The mind must quiet for the heart to guide. And this is what the Stoics, with all their sobriety and presence, still teach us today. The true master doesn't speak loudly. They speak softly, within, in silence, where everything begins. Taming the storm, Stoic techniques to quiet thoughts. The human mind is like the sea, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, and it's easy to get lost in the waves when you don't know how to navigate. The Stoics knew this. That's why they created simple yet powerful techniques to calm the inner waters. Not with magic formulas, but with silent practices that shape character, clear perception, and restore self-control. Because while external winds blow, the only anchor lies within, mastery of the mind. The first technique is detachment, or as they called it, the dichotomy of control. Faced with a distressing thought, the Stoic would ask, "Is this within my power or not?" This question alone eliminates half the anxiety, because much of our suffering comes from the illusion of control over the uncontrollable. When you learn to let go of what you cannot change, the mind stops fighting ghosts, and silence begins to settle as a result. The second practice is negative visualization. Instead of fleeing from pain, the Stoic faced it head-on. They meditated on losses, on death, on failures, not out of pessimism, but to tame fear. Because when the worst scenario is accepted internally, it loses its power. The mind, accustomed to running, calms when it realizes it can endure, that it doesn't need to panic, that anticipated suffering is a waste of life. This, in itself, is liberating. The third is mindfulness of the present. Epictetus said we are unhappy because we live too much in the past and the future. A Stoic returns to the now often. They observe their breath, listen to the sounds around them, feel their feet on the ground. They anchor themselves in the real because they know the unbridled mind always wants to escape. Silencing, then, is returning. Returning to the body, to the moment, to what truly exists. And in this return, the storm begins to dissipate. Another practice is guided inner dialogue. The Stoics wrote to themselves. They questioned their impulses. They challenged their own judgments. They knew we are not what we think. We are what we choose to believe about our thoughts. The difference is subtle but immense. When a negative thought arises, the Stoic doesn't fight it with shouts. They observe, investigate, and replace it with a clearer, more virtuous perspective. There's also the power of the Stoic morning. Upon waking, the wise prepare for the day like a warrior entering the battlefield. Today, I will encounter ungrateful, self-centered, impatient people. And by anticipating this, they shield themselves. It's not about expecting the worst, but about not being surprised by it. This inner preparation reduces reactivity. The mind becomes firmer, less hostage to the environment. And inner silence ceases to be fragile. It becomes a fortress. The last, and perhaps deepest technique is memento mori, the remembrance of death, not as fear, but as clarity. The mind agitates over small things because it forgets the great truth. We are finite. Time is short. Every noisy thought that pulls us from the present is a piece of life that doesn't return. The Stoics meditated on this daily, and the more aware of death, the fuller they lived, and the quieter their minds became. By integrating these practices into daily life, the storm that once seemed untamable begins to lose strength. The mind becomes like a calm lake, reflecting the sky with clarity. And in this calm mirror, we see clearly who we are, what we feel, and where we want to go. Taming thoughts isn't about preventing them from arising. It's learning to let them pass without dragging us along. That is art. That is silence. That is Stoicism. The invisible weight of emotions. How calm brings clarity. It's not always what we live through that exhausts us. It's what we feel without knowing how to name. Unspoken anger, stifled sadness, fear disguised as haste. These invisible weights accumulate silently until, suddenly, the soul screams, and the body listens. The Stoic understood that ignoring emotions isn't wisdom, it's self-sabotage. But reacting to them blindly is too. True virtue lies in the calm presence that observes, understands, and transforms what is felt. Emotion itself isn't the problem. It's like a wave, natural, fleeting, legitimate. What destroys us is attachment to it. It's letting ourselves drown instead of surfing the tide. The agitated mind interprets everything as personal, urgent, definitive. The calm mind sees emotions as visitors. They arrive, convey something, and leave. Clarity begins when we stop fighting what we feel and start dialoguing with these inner forces, without fear, without haste, without guilt. Seneca said, "Anger is a temporary madness." The same applies to envy, anxiety, guilt. In a state of emotional turmoil, we see everything distorted. What was small becomes giant. What was simple seems impossible. That's why the Stoics valued the practice of eupatheia, balanced emotions guided by reason. It's not about becoming a stone, but a river, deep, flexible, unshakable in its essence. Clarity is born from calm, and this calm isn't improvised. It's built little by little in small acts, breathing before responding, observing before judging, waiting before acting. Each of these pauses is a vote of confidence in your own discernment. The silence between stimulus and response is where freedom lies. The Stoic knew, when the mind is at peace, emotion transforms into wisdom, and life stops being reactive. It becomes creative. In this serenity, we realize how many decisions were made out of fear, how many words hurt because they were spoken in the heat of emotion, how many opportunities were lost because anxiety stole the present. The calm mind sees all this without guilt, but with responsibility. It learns from the past without clinging to it. It looks to the future with clarity, not haste. And so, lucidity becomes a habit, not an exception. Many mistake calm for weakness. But the Stoic shows that true strength is silent. It doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't shout. It doesn't react to the first impulse. Stoic strength is steady presence, inner mastery, emotional freedom. A calm person is a soul that has weathered many storms and learned to be an ocean. It doesn't get carried away by every tide. And when this happens, the mind aligns with the body, and clarity emerges like light after fog. Lucidity isn't having all the answers. It's seeing honestly, feeling without confusion, deciding with lightness. And this only happens when the mind isn't hostage to emotion. Emotional silence isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of feeling with awareness. It's allowing emotion to flow without letting it sweep us away. Stoicism teaches this with mastery, as if whispering, "Don't fight what you feel, master it with presence." And when we learn to feel with calm, living becomes simpler. Choices gain meaning, relationships gain lightness, the mind gains space, and the heart, freedom. In the end, what we wanted wasn't control, it was clarity, and it was always available, waiting only for the noise to cease. Just silence, to see. Less thought, more presence, the Stoic and the now. We live as if life will begin tomorrow, as if there's an ideal moment ahead when everything will finally make sense. But time doesn't wait. It flows silently while our mind wanders between past guilt and future anxieties. The Stoics warned us about this with vehemence. The only real thing is the now. And a mind that overthinks, that calculates, that anticipates and revisits what's gone is always absent from the only time possible, the present. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But how can you react wisely if the mind isn't present? How can you make good decisions if you're emotionally trapped in situations that no longer exist or haven't yet arrived? The overthinking mind is like a traveler who never unpacks, always between one place and another, never truly anywhere. The Stoic breaks this cycle by cultivating the moment. They don't flee the now, they embrace it. Being present is a daily exercise. It's feeling the sun's warmth on your skin as you walk. It's tasting food without checking your phone. It's listening to someone without mentally planning your response. Presence is simple, but it requires courage, because it places us face to face with life as it is, unfiltered. This can be uncomfortable, but also profoundly liberating. The present mind doesn't judge, it witnesses. And in witnessing, silence settles. Thoughts don't disappear, they keep passing like clouds in the sky. But when we're anchored in the now, they stop carrying us away. We can see them come, acknowledge their presence, and let them go. This is the Stoic practice of mindfulness, which has nothing mystical or complicated about it. It's just the act of living each moment with open eyes, conscious breath, and an available heart. Nothing more, and nothing less. Overthinking pulls us from life. It places us in a fictional world where we relive pains and anticipate tragedies that may never happen. The restless mind believes thinking is control. But the Stoic knows that overthinking is often a subtle form of fear. Fear of feeling, fear of failing, fear of simply living. That's why they train their presence like a warrior sharpens their sword, not out of vanity, but necessity. Being present isn't naive. On the contrary, it's incredibly lucid. Because only by being fully in the now can you perceive what's really happening. Presence shows what haste hides. It connects us to reality, not projections. It brings us back to the body, to the moment, to what matters. And in this simplicity, the mind stops shouting. Silence doesn't need to be forced. It happens naturally as a consequence of attention. Marcus Aurelius jotted down his thoughts to remind himself of the essential. Life is now. Breathe, observe, accept. And this practice still echoes in our modern days. When the mind returns to the now, problems shrink. Decisions become clearer. Anxiety loses its grip. Because everything you need, everything that truly exists, is happening in this moment. Everything beyond that is illusion. Ultimately, the present is where healing resides, where cycles can be closed, where changes begin, where the soul breathes. The Stoic knew there's no clarity outside the now, and silencing the mind is, above all, a return, a reconnection with what was always here, but which can only be seen when we are truly here too. Silence as strength, the Stoic response to a noisy world. The modern world shouts. It shouts for attention, for approval, for quick answers. It shouts on social media, in ads, in unrestrained opinions. And in this noise, many believe they must shout back to exist. But the Stoic takes another path. They understand that true power lies not in being heard, but in knowing how to be silent. Because silence, when it comes from within, isn't absence. It's mastery. It's presence. It's strength. Silencing amidst chaos is an act of lucid rebellion. While everyone reacts, the Stoic observes. While the world rushes, they slow down. not out of indifference, but strategy. They know that external noise only echoes loudly when it finds an equally agitated mind. That's why they cultivate silence as a shield. And more than protection, silence becomes a weapon. An invisible but powerful weapon, capable of dissolving provocations and avoiding unnecessary wars. There's strength in not responding. There's wisdom in not explaining. There's greatness in simply not engaging with everything. The Stoic understands that not every battle is worth fighting, that the price of inner peace is sometimes the conscious choice to stay silent in the face of ignorance, pride, or unchangeable injustice. Silence in this context isn't passivity, it's maturity. It's the virtue of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to know who they are. Seneca said that speaking too much is a symptom of an insecure mind. The wise speak little because they think deeply, and they think deeply because they've learned to listen more. Stoic silence isn't empty, it's laden with attention, with presence, with intention. It's the space where the right words are born, where emotions are filtered, where the right response can finally emerge. Because in impulse, everything is noise. But in silence, everything is revealed. Silence is also a response, often the most powerful one. It sets boundaries. It exposes truths without the need for confrontation. It teaches others that we're not obligated to react, that we're not hostages to others' approval, that we can be free even amidst the noise. For the Stoic, silence is a choice, not omission. It's steady firmness. It's the manifestation of a spirit that refuses to be dragged by others' emotions. In a world where everyone wants to speak, the true differentiator is knowing how to listen, including to oneself. Listening to your own patterns, impulses, fragilities. Silence allows this rare kind of listening. It reveals what lies behind compulsive speech. It opens space for self-knowledge. And a mind that knows itself, that observes itself, that understands itself, becomes unshakable. Not because it doesn't feel, but because it feels with clarity. Silence also heals. It mends wounds that words would only deepen. It calms tempers that confrontation would only inflame. And above all, it protects what is sacred, your own peace. The Stoic remains silent, not because they have nothing to say, but because they know the value of each word and the energy it carries. They prefer to save their strength for what truly matters, and in this act of restraint, they find freedom. Thus, silence ceases to be absence and becomes a conscious choice. A refuge, yes, but also a stance, a way of living, a way of standing firm without noise, without shouting, without needing to win debates, because the Stoic has already won when they refuse to lose themselves. And at the center of this noisy world, there's a point of calm, of firmness, of lucidity. That's where they remain, in silence. And it's in this silence that their strength resides. When everything quiets, the encounter with true clarity. There's a rare moment when everything quiets. The mind stops racing, the heart stops aching, the body settles. It's as if time itself pauses. No urgency, no distractions, no need to prove anything. Just being, raw, present, awake. This moment, which seems so distant from daily life, is exactly what the Stoic cultivated. Because in this absolute silence, what we all seek is born. Clarity. Clarity isn't knowing everything. It's seeing clearly. It's recognizing what you feel, what you desire, what no longer serves you. It's seeing your own excesses, the illusions you carry, the fears you mask with distractions. And this is only possible when the mind stops interfering, justifying, scheming. The Stoic understands. Overthinking is fog. Silencing allows the truth to emerge. Gentle, but undeniable. When everything quiets, what was confused organizes itself, as if the pieces of the inner puzzle finally find their place. No mental effort, just permission. It's at this point you realize you don't need to do so much. That life doesn't demand haste, but presence. And that what seemed complex was just an agitated mind trying to control the uncontrollable. Silence, then, doesn't just reveal, it reorganizes. In this state of clarity, you don't feel full. You feel light, because it's not an accumulation of answers. but a release of weights. Thoughts become more spaced, emotions clearer, desires more aligned. What remains is authenticity. You see yourself as you are, without adornments, without masks, without noise. And this vision of yourself is the starting point for any real transformation. Marcus Aurelius said, "A man's life is what his thoughts make of it." But the modern Stoic understands that before transforming thoughts, you must silence their excess. Clarity doesn't come from thinking more, it comes from thinking better. And thinking better is only possible when there's inner space. Silence is that space, a sanctuary where ideas can mature and decisions can be made with firmness and calm. It's in this silent place that you distinguish what's yours from what was imposed, what you truly desire from what you've learned to want. It's in this encounter that you discover you might not need so much, just more truth, more peace, more coherence. Clarity doesn't shout, it whispers, and only those who silence within can hear it. At this point, life stops being a series of tasks to complete and becomes an experience to live, with purpose, with direction, with serenity. Because when everything quiets, even fears seem smaller. Doubts, easier to handle. Problems, less urgent. What changes isn't the world, it's the gaze. And this new gaze is the gift that silence offers. That's why the Stoic doesn't seek silence as an escape, but as a return. They don't isolate to avoid the world, but to reconnect with themselves. And when they return whole, with steady steps, with calm eyes, with real presence. Because those who have experienced the clarity born of silence never again settle for noise. The return to simplicity, living with clarity, is living with lightness. At the end of the journey, we no longer seek more things, we seek less weight, less mental baggage, less emotional noise, less haste. The path of silence is, in truth, the path back to simplicity. A life where every gesture has presence, every word has intention, and every choice arises from peace, not fear. The Stoics knew, living with clarity is living with lightness. Because a clear mind makes the heart light, and a light heart guides with precision. In simplicity, we rediscover the essential. We find that we don't need answers for everything, that some questions exist not to be answered, but to keep us humble. We also discover that true life organization isn't achieved with packed schedules, but with a tranquil soul, with an orderly mind. And that, contrary to what's said, it's not speed that brings progress, it's direction. Clarity shows this with gentleness. It makes us realize that much of what we called goals were just distractions, that many objectives were mechanisms to escape emptiness, that much of what we accumulated served only to fill silences we didn't know how to bear. But now, after navigating the noise, we learn to value empty space, silence, the pause, the not doing. And it's in this space that true life begins, no longer driven by the ego that wants to impress, but by the soul that simply wishes to be. The Stoic doesn't seek to be admired, they seek to be coherent. They don't live to prove, they live to experience deeply each moment. And this is only possible when living lightly, when choosing to carry only what's necessary, truth, presence, peace. Lightness is born from acceptance, from accepting that life is impermanent, that others are uncontrollable, that the world is uncertain, but also from accepting that, even so, we can choose our attitude, that we can build silence even amidst noise, that we can be a lighthouse even in stormy seas. The Stoic doesn't deny pain, they traverse it with dignity, and in traversing it, they find lightness on the other side. This lightness isn't superficial. It's the lightness of someone who has faced themselves, who has stopped running, who has made peace with the past, let go of the future, and planted themselves in the present. It's a lightness that doesn't fear silence, because it has already found itself in it. And so, each step becomes smoother, each decision clearer, each word more precise. Life begins to flow again, silencing the mind, organizing life, achieving clarity. This isn't a final destination. It's a practice, a daily choice. An art, as we said in the beginning, the art of being within oneself, of not getting lost in excesses, of returning to the center, of living, at last, with presence, with soul, with serenity. So take a deep breath. Look within, observe what can be left behind, what can be simplified, and ask yourself, what brings me closer to peace? Because where there is peace, there is clarity, and where there is clarity, there is freedom. This is the true conquest of Stoic silence. Silencing the mind isn't a destination, but a practice, a gesture repeated daily by those who understand that inner peace isn't found, it's cultivated. And like any art, it requires attention, presence, surrender. The Stoic doesn't wait for the world to quiet to find serenity. They build serenity despite the world. The clarity achieved isn't fleeting. It transforms the gaze. It redefines what's urgent. It shows that many of our pains didn't come from facts, but from how we interpreted them. And this awareness doesn't make us cold. It makes us free. Free from drama, from excess, from the confusion that once seemed normal. This ebook ends, but the silence continues. Within you, there's now a cleaner, calmer, truer space. Return to it whenever the noise outside tries to take over. Because true strength isn't in imposing yourself, it's in remaining steady, even in silence. Living with clarity is living with lightness. Living with lightness is living with soul.